Is a moment that occurs every night of your life that most people pass through without awareness, without intention, and therefore without using the most creative window available to them as human beings. It is the interval between waking and sleep, not the drama of falling asleep, not the moment when consciousness finally surrenders and the day ends. The interval, that soft dissolving, may not quit here, and not quit gone passage, when the day has released its grip and sleep, has not yet fully claimed you. Your body is heavy, and your breathing has deepened, but some thread of awareness still persists, observing without effort, present without activity. In the science of the mind, this state has a name: the hypnagogic threshold. Neville called it something simpler. He called it the most fertile ground for impression that the human being possesses. A place where the door between the conscious and the subconscious stands briefly, completely open, and whatever passes through that door in those final moments of surrender is received without argument, without editing, without the resistance that the waking conscious mind so reliably provides. Most nights you pass through this threshold by accident. Ever happen to be in your mind the day's unresolved tensions, tomorrow's anxieties, the mental replay of conversations that went wrong? Those are the impressions you carry into the subconscious. The subconscious, which does not evaluate what it receives, only creates from it, takes those impressions and works through the night to build their corresponding reality. I've been impressing the subconscious every night of your life. The only question is whether you have been doing it consciously. Tonight I want to show you how to do it consciously. Not as a ritual, not as a ceremony, not as a performance of intention directed at some external cosmic intelligence, as a precise, practical, repeatable act of inner creation, one that Neville considered among the most powerful available to anyone working seriously with this teaching. A waking conscious mind is a magnificent instrument for navigating the physical world. It analyzes, compares, evaluates, reasons. It asks whether something is likely, whether it has happened before, whether the evidence supports it. It is, in the best sense of the word, critical, and that criticality is genuinely useful for most of what daily life requires. It is a terrible medium for creative impression. Because when you try to assume a new state while fully awake and critical, the conscious mind immediately produces its objections. This is not currently true. The evidence contradicts it. You have tried this before. Be careful, not out of malice, out of its nature, which is to compare what you are presenting to what it already knows, and to notice the discrepancy. And noticing that critical comparison is precisely the interference that keeps the new assumption from settling into the deeper creative stratum where it would actually produce something. The hypnagogic threshold. This criticism largely dissolves. The analytical faculty loosens. The mind's habit of checking new information against old experience loses its grip. What you present to consciousness in this state is not evaluated, it is simply received. It passes without resistance into the subconscious, where the creative work actually happens. And there it takes root with a depth and firmness that the same image presented to the fully waking mind cannot achieve. This is why Neville placed such extraordinary emphasis on the state of consciousness just before sleep, not because of any mystical property of the nighttime, because at this threshold, the door is genuinely open, and whatever you bring to that door passes through unobstructed. Let me be precise about the mechanics, because precision here produces results that vagueness cannot. You are not asking for something. You are not sending a request to an external intelligence and hoping it responds favorably. You're not putting out energy to attract matching energy from the universe. You are doing something far, more direct, and far more completely within your own authority, as you are impressing a specific state upon the subconscious creative mind. The subconscious operates entirely from the impressions it has received. It does not question them. It does not evaluate whether they are deserved or realistic or appropriately humble. It simply takes the image, the felt assumption, the inner state it has been given, and constructs the physical circumstances that correspond to it, not as reward for good work, not as punishment for inadequacy, as the simple, mechanical, entirely impersonal operation of a creative faculty following its instructions. What you impress upon it before sleep is among the most powerful of those instructions, for two reasons. First, because of the threshold quality, we have discussed the state of deep receptivity in which the impression is received without resistance. Second, because the subconscious operates through the entire period of sleep hours in which the conscious mind has stepped aside, and the deeper creative intelligence works freely, elaborating, connecting, preparing the invisible groundwork for what will eventually appear as visible circumstance. Think of it this way. The impression you give the subconscious before sleep is a seed placed in extraordinarily rich soil during the very season when growth is most vigorous. The gardener does not stay awake to watch it grow. The gardener plants it, leaves it in the dark, and trusts the intelligence already operating within the seed and the soil. The only job at the threshold is to plant the right seed. What is the right seed? Neville was specific, and his specificity matters, not a general feeling of well-being, not an affirmation repeated toward an external target, not gratitude for things you do not yet have, expressed in the hope that the performance of gratitude will activate a receiving mechanism. A scene specific, sensory, complete and located after the wish has been fulfilled. Choose one scene, not the panorama of your whole desired life. The one moment, the simplest, most natural moment that could only exist if what you desire were already real, if you desire a healed body. Find the scenes in which you are moving through a completely ordinary morning, and the ease of your movement is so unremarkable to you that you are not even thinking about it. If you desire financial freedom, find the moment not of receiving a check, not of the dramatic arrival of money, but of the casual afternoon, when paying for something feels like nothing, and you are already thinking about the next thing, because the transaction did not rise to the level of concern. If you desire a specific relationship, find the moment of the most ordinary domesticity, the kitchen, the conversation about nothing important, the ease of two people who have long since stopped performing for each other. A scene should have the quality of after not arriving, not almost there, but already so settled in this reality that it has the texture of the familiar. Neville called it living in the end, not the journey to the end itself, made vivid and inhabitable and ordinary. This ordinariness is crucial. Dramatized version of the wish fulfilled. The moment of triumph, the peak of achievement carries within it the emotional signature of something exceptional, something not yet normal, something arrived at from a distance, the subconscious, which creates the world you live in rather than the world you visit. It needs the scene that corresponds to a life, not to a peak moment. Find the quiet, ordinary, unremarkable moment in your desired life and bring that to the threshold. Approach to the threshold is as important as what you bring to it. Do not attempt this from a state of effort or urgency. The very quality that makes the threshold powerful, the relaxation of the critical faculty, the softening of the will, is undermined by trying hard. If you cannot force your way into receptivity, receptivity is its own condition, and it is achieved by releasing rather than grasping. Lie down. This is not incidental. The horizontal position is Neville's specific recommendation because it is the natural posture of sleep, and therefore already begins to shift the body-mind toward the threshold state. If you have been sitting upright in active engagement with the day, lying down is itself a signal to the nervous system that wakefulness is yielding. Now, do nothing energetically for a few moments. Simply be horizontal. The day's activity begin to recede. The breath will naturally deepen without any instruction from you. The muscles will begin to release the tension they have been holding. Do not manage this process, simply allow it. When you feel the quality of attention beginning to soften, when the mental replay of the day begins to lose its urgency, the sense of having to do begins to fade, you are approaching the threshold. This is the moment to bring your scene, enter it. Do not observe it from outside. Move inside it. Let the scene surround you rather than being projected in front of you. Where are you? What is immediately around you? What is the quality of light in this place? Is the first simple sensation that belongs to this moment, not to represent that you are imagining your desire, but to represent that you are simply here, a place you know, in a life that is yours. Do not think about the scene. Be in it. There is a specific quality of attention that makes this distinction real rather than verbal. Thinking about the scene maintains the observer. Being in it dissolves the observer into the experience. You know you have made the shift when the scene begins to feel as natural as memory, when there is no longer a you here and a scene there, but simply the scene. And you are in it, the way you are in your present experience. The scene matters, but the feeling the scene carries is what actually does the work. Will taught that feeling is the secret. Not emotion in the dramatic sense, not manufactured joy or performed gratitude. The felt sense of the scene being real, a specific physical bodily quality of being in the place you are imagining, rather than imagining it from outside. When you are genuinely inside the scene, when the imagination is inhabiting, rather than observing the body, begins to respond to it as real. And this is not a metaphor. The subconscious does not distinguish between what is physically present and what is vividly imagined. It receives both as experience. It constructs from both with equal faithfulness. The quality of feeling you want is not excitement. Excitement often contains longing, the edge of something that is not yet here. What you want is the quiet, settled, bodily relaxation of someone who is already there. The absence of reaching, the absence of the gap, the particular quality of a person who is at home. The most complete sense of that phrase, who does not need to convince themselves of anything, because the reality of their situation does not require convincing. The quality unhurried, settled, unremarkable, completely at ease, is the feeling of the wish fulfilled, not the drama of its arrival, the normalcy of its presence. Find that quality. Let it suffuse the scene, and then let it carry you into sleep. This is the specific instruction that Neville returned to repeatedly, because it is the specific instruction that most people fail to execute. And the failure is always the same. They perform the scene, they get the feeling briefly, and then they notice they have the feeling, and they begin to think about whether it is working and whether they are doing it correctly, whether this time will be different from the last time. And in that moment of critical review, stepped out of the scene entirely and returned to the position of the observer who is trying. The instruction is not to maintain the scene while falling asleep. It's to fall asleep inside the scene, to let consciousness yield to sleep without ever departing from the felt sense of the wish fulfilled. A scene does not need to remain vivid or detailed as you approach the deepest threshold. In fact, it will naturally simplify and blur as sleep approaches. What must persist is the feeling, the settled, quiet, already there quality. Let that be the final conscious experience before sleep takes you entirely. This is why Neville recommended choosing a simple scene rather than a complex one. Complexity requires maintenance. Simplicity can be held lightly, lead naturally into the surrender of sleep without effort. One single quiet, ordinary moment of the life you desire. Feel it. Let sleep take you from inside it. Is received in those final moments, passes into the subconscious, without resistance, without filtering, without the editorial intervention of the waking critical mind. Is received as an instruction. The subconscious, which works through the night, while you are absent from conscious oversight. It begins immediately to construct the conditions that correspond to what it has been given. Neville taught that there are actually two thresholds in every 24 hours. The one before sleep, which we have been discussing, and the one upon waking, the moments immediately after waking, before the conscious mind has fully re-engaged, before the day's agenda has asserted itself, before habit and worry have resumed their claim on your attention. These two carry something of the threshold quality. The subconscious is near the surface. The filtering function of the critical mind is still loosening its sleep. And what you bring to consciousness in those first quiet moments of waking passes into the day's operating state with unusual depth and consistency. Most people, in those first moments, immediately reach for their device or immediately begin running the mental inventory of what must be done today and what remains unresolved from yesterday. The day begins from its very first moment in the consciousness of tasks and problems in the world of Caesar, already agonizing around what is not yet done and what might go wrong if those first moments were spent differently. Not in extended practice, not in a lengthy visualization session before you have opened your eyes, and simply, before you move, before you reach, before the day claims you take the scene from last night and feel it again. One breath inside the wish fulfilled. One moment in which, before the world has had the chance to impose its current version of your circumstances, you have already inhabited the inner state of the life you are building. This is not a grand gesture. It is 30 seconds, perhaps a minute. But those 30 seconds establish the inner register from which the entire day unfolds. A day that begins from the consciousness of the wish fulfilled moves differently than a day that begins from the consciousness of yesterday's unresolved circumstances. Not because the outer world is immediately different, but because the inner state from which you engage. The outer world is different, and the inner state is what determines, over time, what the outer world becomes. Here is the honest and unglamorous truth about this work. One night of this practice will produce something. 2 weeks of this practice will produce more. Months of this practice done consistently, without abandoning the new assumption when the outer world is still presenting, the old reality will produce what appears to those watching from outside. It will be transformation that arrived from nowhere. But the consistency is everything, not intensity, not the perfect execution of a technique in an extended ceremony of intention. Consistency, the daily, quiet, unremarkable return to the same scene, the same feeling, the same inner address, the same unhurried inhabitation of the life you have chosen. Night after night, before the threshold takes you, the subconscious creates from cumulative impression. A single vivid impression can plant deeply, particularly at the threshold. But it is the repeated impression returned to with natural ease and without effort, until the scene has the familiarity of something actually lived, that gradually becomes the operating assumption from which the subconscious constructs your experience. Think of it not as a practice you are working at, but as a life you are already living in the interior dimension. The home you are returning to each night, the scene that is becoming through familiarity and repetition, more real in your imagination than the conditions you are currently in the process of changing. Gradual shift in felt reality from the old outer circumstances being more vivid and real than the inner assumption. The inner assumption being more vivid and real than the old outer circumstances is the exact shift that precedes the outer world's rearrangement. You're not waiting for the world to change so that you can feel different. You are feeling different consistently enough that the world must eventually change to correspond. I want to leave you with one more thought, because it may change the way you understand every night of your life going forward. Sleep is not a pause in your creative activity. It's the period of your deepest creative activity, the hours in which the subconscious, unobstructed by the critical faculty, works with the impressions it has been given and begins the invisible construction of their physical expression. Every morning you wake into a world that is fractionally different from the world you fell asleep in, not because physical circumstances have been rearranged overnight, but because the subconscious has been working, the connections being prepared, the inner architecture of the coming change being elaborated, invisible roots of future outer circumstances growing in the dark. You participate in this process, whether you are aware of it or not. The question is only whether you participate consciously or by default, whether the impressions you give the subconscious before sleep are ones you have chosen deliberately, the ones that the day's anxieties have provided by accident. The threshold is there every night. The subconscious is ready every night. The door is open every night. You can bring to it what the day left in your mind. By default, its tensions and unfinished concerns and ambient worries, and the subconscious will faithfully create more of the same. You can bring to it the scene of the life you have chosen to inhabit, felt with the quiet certainty of someone already home, and let the subconscious work through the night with that. The only difference between these two approaches is awareness. And awareness is something you now have. Use it tonight. Use it tomorrow night. Use it every night. With the easy consistency of someone who has understood that this is not a technique they are applying, but a life they are choosing to live from the inside out. The threshold will be there. The subconscious will be ready. Bring it the right seed. Good evening. May you cross the threshold tonight in the feeling of the wish already fulfilled, and may you wake tomorrow with the quiet, the growing certainty that what you planted in the dark is already finding its way toward the light. This is Neville Lectures. I'll see you again in the next video.